Thanks for coming. For joining us on the Q&A session of Climate Solutions Week 2021. Good morning, evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Frank Fisher, and I will be co-hosting and co-moderating. I'm a bird keeper at the St. Louis Zoo. I co-chair the Climate Change Task Force with Lisa Ligis, and I'm a member of the team. Co-hosting with me tonight is Hannah Phillips. Hannah is the manager of docents and interpreters, and she is also a member of the Climate Change Task Force. Before I introduce tonight's climate champions, I have a few housekeeping items to share. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared at stlzoo.org/climate change. We are unable that you have tonight for our speakers in the chat. We may not get to all the questions tonight, but know they will be recorded and shared at stlzoo.org/climate. Finally, please remember to be respectful and courteous to our presenters and each other. Please keep your questions relevant to the speaker's topics. If someone is unable to follow these calls, their comments or questions may be removed, and they themselves may be removed entirely from the webinar. So without further ado, let's get started. Our distinguished presenters tonight are Jim Karpowicz from Missouri Coalition for the Environment, Crystal Chissell from Project Drawdown, and Erica Williams from A Red Circle. They have all presented their webinars this week. We'll now enter your questions. How is that?
And
Awesome.
Frank, just a quick correction on my name. Last name is pronounced Chissell.
Say that one more time. I lost you for a second there, Crystal.
Chissell. My last name is pronounced Chissell.
Chissell.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we have, I don't know how many people we have in attendance right now. 7? Do we have questions yet?
5 of those people are us.
Right. No, I saw.
No, I didn't see Crystal or Jim's presentations. Is it okay if we go around and kind of talk about what we presented about?
I think that's a great idea. Let's do a quick summary
Absolutely.
review.
Happy to do that. I will go first unless Crystal wants to. You go, Crystal.
Okay. So I'm with Project Drawdown, and Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization that is focused exclusively on climate solutions. So the organization was founded to answer the question of, is it possible to reach drawdown? Drawdown is the point when concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere begin to decline year to year. So our organization was founded to answer this question: is it possible to reach drawdown by 2050? And is it possible to reach drawdown only with existing solutions? So those that are already proven, already scaling somewhere in the world, and only solutions for which there is existing data and science to prove their effectiveness. So there's no new technologies included, no silver bullets, and our research and analysis presents a system of climate solutions. In addition, our team of researchers. There have been approximately 100 involved in the project since 2015. And they have not only collected the scientific consensus about climate solutions, but also done predictive mathematical modeling about the number of gigatons of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that these solutions can reduce. And so basically, we presented a full suite of climate solutions that have proven effectiveness that are backed up by science and data. And basically providing that as a resource for the world to move forward on climate solutions.
Thank you.
I have a question, Crystal.
Sure.
You mentioned that you were only using these practical solutions that we're talking about turning to electric cars and things that are already in place. But are there any weird sci-fi type, like some giant machine that's going to gobble up carbon? Does any of that stuff exist in the real world, or is it just? Are people going to try to sci-fi their way out of this problem 10 or 15 years down the road?
Well, I think that people are already trying to sci-fi us out of the problem. For instance, there's been a lot of testing of carbon capture technology, but none of it has proven to be very effective or affordable. So mainly the carbon capture technology that's been tested to date, it really draws very little carbon out of the atmosphere relative to the extravagant cost of it. So that's why our research has focused on existing, proven, and affordable solutions, so that we don't have to wait for a magic bullet, a silver bullet, or magic solution, but we can use what we already have on hand. And many of the solutions are technologies, but they also include practices that support the Earth's natural processes, that support what we call carbon sinks, which is the natural processes that draw carbon out of the atmosphere and into plant matter, soil, and store it there. So a large number of our suite of solutions focuses on supporting natural carbon sinks.
Well, my little presentation, my contribution to this regards big river issues, specifically the Missouri River. That's kind of why I was brought on the Coalition for the Environment to be their river advocate. And I do have a long background with the Missouri River. I live right next to the Missouri River near Columbia, and was very involved in the formation of Missouri River Relief 20 years ago, which is a river cleanup organization. But basically, I kind of gave an overview of what's happening on the river. And what's happening on the river is increased rainfall. There's more rainfall than the system was designed to deal with. So, and the Bank Stabilization and Navigation Act has narrowed the river so that when we do get these excess rainfalls, we get massive amounts of flooding. And it's been flooding here, 7 out of the past 10 years. We've been in high water events where people are losing money with their crops. And so we just discussed things that are evolving, that are maybe a step beyond the political system is sort of in a stalemate. I kind of made the analogy to the sort of politicalization of the mask mandates. Masks are a good idea, but for some reason we've developed this weird concept that, if you're a Republican, you don't wear a mask. If you're a Democrat, you do wear a mask, which makes no lick of sense. Well, the same thing kind of developed about river policies, where people on the right, which was assumed to be the agricultural interest, wanted bigger levies and more levies, and people on the left, which were the environmental interests, wanted less levies, more connection to the river as its natural floodplain, and more interested in natural resources and endangered species. And that dichotomy was sort of a false dichotomy, because the people that live here along the river, everybody just wants to make a living and get along. And so that's starting to happen. We discussed the sort of case study up in Atchison County where the local levee district, the local farmers in that county said that they wanted a federal levee setback, which meant that the river would have a lot more access to its floodplain. The farms behind that levee would be protected, but they were essentially giving up some unproductive land back to the river. And that was very controversial because the federal government, the Corps of Engineers, does not rebuild levees in different places from where they were. They're like, this is where our levee is and we will rebuild it, but we're not going to move it. Well, they did. So that's good. That was sort of a groundbreaking effort. The other thing that's going on is in the rebuilding of these levees, they're trying to build back better, to use a phrase, to make them a little lower, a little lower in elevation on the lower end of the levees. So when the water does come up, it backfills their fields instead of busting through the top of the levee and making giant scour holes and the like. So in a sense, the locals are sort of adapting to climate change. They don't really call it climate change. They say building resilience to severe weather events. But that's going on, and it's going on in a little more open environment. People are like, okay, well, this is going to happen. We're going to get flooded. We're going to get water. What can we do about it? And so hopefully with that positive activity going on the ground, the political situation will change, and some of our political actors will kind of come to see that people that are directly involved with the flooding are actually trying to figure out a way to work with it. And so that's where we're at. I don't know if that's good or bad, but we know that the river is, we know we are going to have increased flooding here. And so that's just a given. And so the challenge is now is what do we do about it? And it's a little different than actually trying to address climate change. This is trying to address one of the symptoms. But I think that's actually part of the strategy, is not only to bring our carbon levels down, but also figure out, and I think the same kind of thing is going on the coasts. Everybody's trying to figure out, how do we live with this? And so that's what we discussed.
It's a lot of mitigation and adaptation,
Right.
I think, at this point. And lots of places are doing it. That's amazing. Erica, you want to summarize what you do?
Yeah, thank you for both of those, Jim and Crystal. Good to meet you guys also. So I presented on behalf of my nonprofit organization, A Red Circle, which is a growing nonprofit in North St. Louis County, where we've started when I founded it in 2017, the plan was to focus on racial equity issues. And one of the first issues that I began to notice within the region is the lack of healthy food. And so that became my first issue. That and education justice. Those became my first two issues. And within working with growing food and educating the community about food, I began to actually learn and then piece together the connection with food and the environment. And the impact of local food and food waste and composting, and how if we're doing the good things that helps with the environment, decreasing greenhouse gases and things of that nature. But if we're not doing the good things, it's really bad for the environment, such as food waste. I talked also about the impact of illegal dumping on the environment and how that impacts our ability to get policy passed regarding food and healthy food access, and how oftentimes we approach these issues in silos as they're separate. Food is one thing, the environment is one thing. But sorry, I've got a little fruit fly thing going on.
Well, you're in that tropical location. You probably have lots of fruit flies there in Aruba or wherever you're at.
Exactly. But if we really think about it, all of that is connected. All of the issues within a healthy environment, a healthy community, they're all interconnected. And so we can begin to do the good things, learn from each other, and grow good food. Will all benefit. So that was A Red Circle's presentation in a nutshell. I shared about some of the other food initiatives that we're doing, and a group of folks working with me called the Good Food Movement, and invited people to get involved in the work that we're doing in North St. Louis County, because food justice is racial justice. And if you look at the typical environmental scope, you haven't seen a lot of Black or people of color working within that space. But if you tie it to what's, tied to their lives, you can actually see it's not just about the big climate change pictures, but the little things within their neighborhoods that make a difference. Littering and dumping and growing food and things like that. So that's what I talked about.
Thank you so much, Erica.
Yes.
You're
ahead.
welcome.
I was just going to say that I just noticed this, tie-in between what Jim and Erica said about what we call the co-benefits of climate solutions, that these are solutions that you would want to implement whether there was a climate crisis or not, because they solve problems in communities, they're good for people's health, help save money, just have all around benefits. So really it's these benefits that happen at the community level are the primary reason to do these solutions. And then there's also a climate benefit.
Yeah, the community level is so important. So I mostly work in the communication standpoint of climate change, how to talk to people and make them feel good and, inspire them to make changes. And it's all about the community level solution because it matches the scale of the problem better than the individual solutions. Still good to turn your lights off and do all those things. But in terms of the scale of the problem, if you really want people to do things, showing them how others are already doing stuff and how they can join in accessible and tangible ways makes a huge difference.
Yes, and it really doesn't matter if you frame it as climate solutions or climate change, as Jim was saying. You're talking about what's important to people's lives.
Yeah, I had a conversation with my dad's cousin, who, we all like to think that people believe the same things we believe and care about the same things that we care about. And he was a climate change denier. And he was asking me what I was doing, and I was very excited. And he said, "Oh, that's part of the liberal propaganda machine." And this town wanted to do solar panels, and he was on the town hall planning board. And I just simply talked to him about solar's just better. Forget about the hippie environmentalist. It's just better. You'll save money, you'll have clean air, it's just better. And when I took that sort of environmentalism out of it and just went straight to, what mattered to him, he suddenly was like, "Oh, maybe it's not such a bad idea."
Exactly. I was listening to Jim's, and I was listening to Erica's, and both had youth involved. So Jim, you said you've gotten fourth graders together, in Columbia, Missouri. Almost every fourth grader got a chance at maybe in 2019.
Well, yeah,
the river and help clean up.
Before COVID, Missouri River Relief, who I'm also intimately involved in, as well as the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. Before COVID, we took every fourth grader in Columbia Public Schools out on the river, which is pretty amazing. It's about 2,000 kids. And we currently have when I say we, I'm not directly involved in the organization as much as I was, but it's still part of that community. There is mornings at the river preschool where people can bring their 3 and 4 year olds down to the river, and there's all these activities for them to do. We also have this renting kid carrier backpacks programs where we give those out for free. So yeah, Missouri River Relief and the Coalition for the Environment have been really active in trying to do outreach to not only young people, but all kinds of volunteers. So that's kind of one of the cool things. It's not just about picking up trash, it's about getting other people interested in picking up trash. So yeah,
Right.
That's what we do.
And bringing them to the river gets them interested in doing, if it is that, but it might spur on, some interest once they get.
We've always joked that trash is sort of the picking up trash becomes a treasure hunt, and kids get really interested when they find something cool, a message in a bottle or some old doll or something. But that's sort of the carrot that gets them interested in the river as a whole. And then when those kids are adults and there's legislation on the docket, they're going to have a vested interest in that river being a more natural place. So we try to keep it entertaining, picking up trash at the same time, but at the same time, I think we're building a constituency for the future of the river.
And Erica, you mentioned about bringing your 8th graders into a big garden. Maybe is it the agriculture center, agriculture
Yep.
education center? And I know that was before COVID, correct?
Well, so the planning for the North County Agricultural Education Center began pre-COVID. It's an urban farm in the city of Pine Lawn, not too far from St. Louis City. And it ended up being built out during quarantine. So we could not host any kids there this last year, but we will have our first field trip there next month. Prior to COVID, we did have 8th graders come to our smaller community garden. They would get to learn about what a food desert is or a food swamp, and they would pick up trash. They also made some signs about like keeping our neighborhood clean, anti-littering signs, which really helped. They made yard signs and we posted them inside the garden fence. And the garden sits right near a bus stop. And at the time when we first found the space, it was, nothing was happening there. But the people who were waiting at the bus stop would just throw their trash down, just throw it down. And then when the wind blows, it blows into the garden on the other side of the fence. And so the kids made signs. They first picked up trash and then they made signs, and we put the signs right along the same side of the street as the bus stop. And so that really helped. And then what ended up happening, this was 2019, I want to say. Now there's a trash can at that bus stop and there's a trash can across the street at the other bus stop. And so us being in that community is like not only bringing good food and fun, but it's helping people to begin to care about the space and put things in the trash can, and not just, because if you see someone else do it, you do it, and then everyone else starts to do it and people stop caring.
I have to give snaps to that. I do just want to pause a quick minute because we do have a few participants, and this is a Q&A. So if you're joining us, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button, and y'all are welcome to put in your questions for our panelists, and I will read them out as they come in. I've got a couple of questions for each of you. The first one being, and I'll start with Crystal, is what in your life inspired you to get or to start thing you're doing now to be involved with the environment?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I think I grew up in Maryland and spent most of my summers on the Chesapeake Bay. And so just by being close to that body of water and being able as a child to just observe the changes, because there's always a lot of change on the shores of a body of water and creeks, and you can be very close to the organisms that live there. And so that's what really built my connection to the natural world and made me want to be involved in environmental work.
Very nice. Jim, how did you get started in it?
That's a good question. I don't know. I was always as a small child, I was walking through creeks and playing in woods and would collect, turtles and snakes, and I had home zoos like crazy. In fact, one of my proudest things is I have this old diploma. I think it's from 1963 from the St. Louis Zoo School that used to be at the bottom of the reptile house. And signed by Marlon Perkins, and Charlie Hessel was my instructor at that. But my recent, but so I've always had an interest in the natural world, and it's just been a part of my life since I was growing up. But recently I moved, about 20 years ago, I moved to this river adjacent property, and walking along the Katy Trail, there was all kinds of trash kind of down in the bottom, you know, right down in the river bottom below the Katy Trail. And that was the result of the floods of 2019 and 2093 and 2095. It was all still there. And that's when we got the impetus to like, hey, you know, maybe we don't have to live with it. I mean, it was like a junkyard down, you know, walking along the trail, and it's not anymore. I mean, that's changed. So, you know, very proud of that. And you know, I don't know what actually drew me to the natural world, but it's always been a thing. I mean, ever, you know, maybe since birth, I don't know. I just liked crawling around in the woods.
I still don't see any questions yet, but wait.
Erica, what inspired you to get going with what you're doing now?
So I was initially inspired, a couple of things actually. I've always lived in North St. Louis County, Normandy, Ferguson, Florissant, and I was working as a paralegal in Clayton prior to this work. And one of the things I began to notice is the closing of businesses and closing of houses, and how hard it was to find the things that we were looking for, and how different the quality of grocery stores was. And anyway, I decided to get into economic development and try to do something on the side to inspire some investment to come into the region to help with jobs and good food and restaurants and things of that nature. And then when Michael Brown Jr. was killed in 2014, my family and I went to our first ever protest. And that kind of like changed my, not mindset, but it kind of made me look at things through more of a racial equity lens and less of an economic development lens. And I kind of switched from just wanting to get some jobs in town, but to look and see what was happening with the community. You know, like I said, when I grew up, the region was not a food desert. You know, we had Schnucks, National, Kroger. We could pick any number of stores to shop at. But over time, the disinvestment really impacted the community. And the disinvestment began to like bleed into how people were being treated, how they were being valued. And, you know, when Michael Brown Jr.'s body was left in the street for 4 hours, that really, you know, kind of made me like, okay, so not only are they taking away the businesses and the jobs, but they're also like showing that they don't care about us as people. And so I began to look and see, okay, so what can I do? What can I use with my power, my education, my platform to begin to make a difference in my neighborhood, in my community? And so fast forward, you know, I'm in school, I'm in politics, not running for office, but helping people run for office. You know, I'm not a politician, but just doing those different things. And I realized, okay, I'm actually spending a lot of time at this law firm when I could be working in my own community full time. And so in 2017, I left the law firm and formed a Red Circle and began to work this full time, first as a volunteer. Now I'm getting paid. But, you know, that was like my inspiration to really look at, okay, so what happened to the food? Why are there so many closures? What happened to the grocery stores, and how can we bring them back? How can we bring healthy food back? How did this become a food swamp where it's acceptable to just have a corner store on, you know, in every neighborhood with chips and cookies and frozen food, but very little produce? I mean, I grew up eating salads and vegetables and stuff. So it became really interesting getting to know the people and driving around like, okay, I can't even find a salad in this neighborhood. Where do people go get food? And so, yes, that like really began to drive my passion for the work. And like I said earlier, the connection between food and the environment was just really natural, just really organic, because you can't talk about good food and local food and growing food and soil health and water health and plant health without thinking about the bigger, you know, climate change part of it.
Do you think that community aspect that's going on in Pine Lawn, do you think that'll spread to the nearby municipalities?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have the city of Pine Lawn involved. We have a councilman from the city of Jennings. He's also involved. And so one of the things that he was able to do once he got elected is get a local ordinance passed that said that if anyone wants to grow food on a local vacant lot that is owned by the city of Jennings, they can do so for $25. Just pay the $25, you can grow food. And so now we're looking at different things like farmers markets and other ways to, one, bring healthy food into the region where the people live, and two, cut down on the transportation that has to happen from, some of the larger farms to get food to a grocery store. And I mentioned this during our presentation. One of our big projects next year will be to begin doing the research to open a community-owned grocery store. Because we have growers, we have, I'm connected with 2 urban farmers that have really big plots of land where their houses are, their farms are, in Spanish Lake. And then we have our farm, we have our garden. We're also connected to a woman who lives in Forestdale. She has farm space and she's let us come out there to grow food. And so we're beginning to like tie all of this together to then open up a store where people can come and shop. And if they, make products, if they want to sell items, if they can do things like that, they can come and bring their products. So it's going to be really like the best of North County. I was like, the best of Missouri with apple butter and things of that nature. But in North County, because we want to be included in this, conversation and in this type of work, but oftentimes we're not. It happens far away. It happens, in various communities. And then they look at us like, well, why don't you care? Well, we do care, but you need to make it so that we understand the issues, that we can really apply what we can do and what we know to solving it.
Thank you, Erica. That's really amazing. We actually have 2 questions in the chat from Maria, and I think they're a little bit directed to you, but anyone else, feel free to chime in. Maria is actually one of the inspectors who issues citations to owners who have alley trash and, all this illegal dumping. And
Maria.
It seems to her that the community doesn't care. And although there are core groups and the outside people blame the local tenants for what's happening, her question is about how do you get the community to really care about this thing? And her follow-up question to that, which might be good for Crystal or for all of you, is about what kinds of questions or things can she take back to her city leaders? I know St. Louis does have a sustainability person, but she's just one person. So I'll throw those out for you. Thanks for those, Maria.
I'll let Jim or Crystal jump in. So one of the things that we're working on, I mentioned this during my presentation, but we're waiting to hear from the EPA on whether or not we get a grant. And the grant is a collaboration grant between a Red Circle, Earth Day 365, and Ujima, which is another new smaller nonprofit organization. So a Red Circle would be kind of like the lead to work in this in St. Louis County. What's kind of frustrating right now is why we started this part of the work is St. Louis County doesn't have a dedicated line, department, email address, anything to report illegal dumping. It's by municipality. And then if you see dumping happening in unincorporated St. Louis County, it's either the police department, the health department, or there's one other department that we could call. So trying to get anything done first on the governmental level is very fragmented. And so when you're trying to talk to residents about, caring, it's not that they don't care, but they're sometimes powerless. I mean, the people who are dumping in these neighborhoods are not the neighbors. They're people who are maybe flipping a house and they go in, they clean out everything from the house, and instead of taking it to the dedicated, place and paying the actual fee to dump it, they just dump it somewhere convenient, and then they pay the smaller fine, or they don't pay a fine at all if they're not caught. There's an abandoned Shop and Save grocery store in the city of Moline Acres that became a dumping site after it closed. And State Rep Ian Mackey in Jeff City was trying to get a law passed that would allow business owners who wanted to open grocery stores and abandoned grocery stores in food deserts to get a state tax credit off their state income tax the following year. Well, so we began to, help support that law. But when I went to the store to, begin to look at it and take pictures, someone also put on Facebook, it's becoming a dumping site. And so this place where we could be selling food, where we could be doing some good things, if we had control of the space, the owner of the space is in Florida. So if we had control of it, we could be doing some things, but instead it's becoming a site for couches and toilets and plumbing and things of that nature. And so the resident got on Facebook, tagged the mayor and maybe like a state senator. So she definitely cares, but there's so much that has to happen in order to get other people to care about us, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure.
And followed up to that, thank you, Erica, was what questions or suggestions do you all have that she or all of us could take to our civic leaders to help move forward on some of these solutions?
Well, I could suggest, at least in the Big River area that I deal with, there is a bill before Congress right now called the Mississippi River Restoration and Implementation Act. It was sponsored by Representative McCullough in Minnesota, but co-sponsored by Cori Bush. And it goes a long way to provide funding for Mississippi River issues all up and down the Mississippi, from Minnesota down to New Orleans, and provide funding particular for disadvantaged communities to take care of issues that they have concerning flooding and stuff. So certainly write Cori Bush and say, yay, this is a great idea. Crystal, it was interesting to me when you were talking about Chesapeake Bay, because this MIRI legislation kind of mirrors both Chesapeake Bay, and I think the Everglades and the Great Lakes have this kind of overarching multi-state thing administered by the EPA that can give out grants and funding and stuff. And this sort of mirrors that program, so that the EPA would have this giant chunk of money. Local communities could apply for, taking old structures out of the floodplain or rebuilding their levees or whatever. So it's a great bill. I don't have the bill number right on me, but look up MIRI or Cori Bush and it'll come up. So that would be something that people should definitely get behind.
So I would say every community is different, of course, but I think there's some basic principles that could work in any community. So one is to work collaboratively and not siloed, so that you're drawing on all of the expertise in the community, from the residents up through the mayor or city council or whoever, business leaders, just trying to create coalitions and to really do some deep questioning about what are the most important issues to the community, what problems can we solve, what problems do we need to solve, and then seeing how do those tie to climate solutions, and how can how can you do sort of multi-solving. But it's really important to include everyone in the conversation and to work on benefiting everyone in the community. I think those are the key principles: not work in silos and look to see how can we solve the most difficult problems.
And I will add real quick, Maria put in Q&A, and I think it was meant for the chat, but saying thanks to Erica, she's now following a Red Circle on Instagram and had heard about Ujima and participated in some Earth Day 365 environmental justice action events. So
great news. Jim, I had a question about a local. So you had mentioned that the Howard Bend levee and the Monarch levee, is there some rebuilding of that going on currently?
No, I don't believe there's anything going on the Monarch levy, but there are multiple things going on the Howard Bend levy, not only sort of legal things concerning the levy and drainage district there, but there's also a proposal before Missouri's House of Representatives to spend a huge amount of money, like $18 million, to put pumps in the bottom of that levy district to pump out the stormwater that they get in. Apparently, you know, most levees don't have stormwater collection issues, but the Howard Bend levy does. So when it rains, it all goes down there and just sits. And the people that want to develop that, then they want to develop it sort of like Chesterfield, want this to spend this federal infrastructure dollars on that. And my suggestion to the few state representatives that I spoke to was, well, if you're going to spend that infrastructure money, spend it on something other than pumps. You know, maybe spend it on redesigning the levees, or, you know, maybe setting the levees back a little bit and allowing the creeks more access to the river. But that pumps, that's a lot of money, and it doesn't really solve the problem. It's sort of a Band-Aid on the problem. So that initiative is still in committee. I don't even think a bill has been proposed. They're talking about it, but there's just a fire hose of federal money that's getting squirted into Jeff City, and they're saying, you know, spend this on infrastructure. And to those guys, infrastructure means concrete and engineering. And hopefully we can convince them that some more nature-based solutions, at least in my area, for flooding, but also for climate change or food deserts. Infrastructure doesn't have to mean talking to construction guys and engineers. It could mean talking to communities about what they need. And so hopefully that message gets across.
Exactly. Yeah. Putting the pumps in and making them pump out the water every time it rains.
Yeah.
It's no different than having to rebuild the levees every time they flood.
Exactly.
Do we have any other Q&As? No open questions.
I had a quick question for you, Frank and Hannah. I'm wondering if you've noticed any climate change effects on the zoo, and whether you've been able to implement any solutions into the zoo infrastructure or operations.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, we're changing out all our building LEDs, so we're starting out the simple way, but there's a lot of HVAC that needs to be redone. So some of the funding that we have right now is going to the infrastructure inside the zoo. In recent years, it's updated the restroom facilities. It's taking care of some really old HVAC. I work in the birdhouse, and it was a building built in 1932. So you can imagine. And there's 3 other buildings just like that.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the HVAC and the leaks in those buildings and what we have to go through year after year after year.
So the zoo has done a lot of work. We've got solar panels on some buildings. Frank said we've changed out the the lights to be all LED. And anytime we build anything new, we're using as much recycled material and putting in green tech. We have a certified LEED green building, and try to implement all of those things. But I've always viewed zoos and aquariums and our cultural institutions as places of practice and an example. It would be great if we as a conservation organization could just snap our fingers and everything's green and we're carbon neutral and all these things. But we're a 90-acre facility that's over 100 years old. And if anybody's ever renovated a house, knows how long it can take, and you sort of have to do these pieces and prioritize. So we do have a director of sustainability, Wanda Colo, who helps direct some of that. But as an institution, we're committed to making these changes and doing better. And we compost a lot of our animal waste as well as all of our food waste. We use sustainably sourced seafood for our animals and for our people. And we're part of the Green Business Challenge and Green Dining Alliance as well. So those are the pieces. We've got a long way to go, but
you're really an example for the region, really. And I'm sure there's a lot of learnings from, what works, what doesn't work, what obstacles you face that will help everybody.
Yeah. So we're not 100% there, but these are the steps, and hopefully folks can find similar ways to do that in their own lives.
And we have a good teen program, Zoo Live Teens, that is really getting teenagers in the community involved in the zoo and zoo programs, and we're seeing them become leaders and really doing a great job, and eventually will become zoo employees or do great things for the environment.
Great to hear.
Well, in your quest to get LAD certified, please don't mess with those old historic buildings, because I just love them. And they to me, like especially the birdhouse, those old aviaries kind of tie the modern natural resource interest into like Teddy Roosevelt's era, kind of that old. I just love that part of the zoo, and so I know I'm not the only one, and I know that the destruction of the birdhouse is not on the docket, but I just wanted to shout out for the historical relevance of those spaces.
Well, that's a great point that you bring up, Jim. I don't think those buildings are going anywhere. It's just about how can we renovate them in a way that maintains the integrity, but also allows us to be as green and environmentally friendly as possible. And a bunch of years ago, the New York Times did a report on the Bronx Zoo, or the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is just a few years older than us and is a huge facility and has historic buildings that are actually on the National Historic Registry of Historic Buildings. And they are really struggling with what to do with them, because they are in no condition to be anybody even to be in there, but they can't tear them down. But to renovate them in a way that is up to par or standard is really challenging. And so that's one thing any facility and anyone who's owned an old house knows. It takes a long time and a lot of thought and a lot of money to get those buildings, up to modern standards while maintaining their historical integrity.
I'm sure it's a nightmare for the maintenance guys. I'm sure.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Call it job security.
Yeah, I want to thank you. I want to tell you a story real quick. Where the zoo has gotten started on doing some trash pickups, whether it be along the river or in the community up by Wild Care Park. But recently, my wife and I went on vacation, and we went up to the Northwest, and we heard that walking along the beach and finding what they call sea glass is somewhat special thing to do. So, what sea glass was just bottles thrown into the ocean, whether they be green or Coke bottles, and then tumbled through the rocks and then washed up on the beach. But now it's like a treasure.
Frank, having grown up on the East Coast in Massachusetts, so Crystal, I feel you with the Chesapeake Bay. Sea glass is very special, especially if you can find blue sea glass. That is rare and elusive. I've noticed, though, and my mom has noticed, that in the past I don't know, 20 years, 30 years or so, there's less and less sea glass. And she thinks it's because everyone is recycling more, which I choose also to believe.
Absolutely. Here, here. Free plastic pollution. That's what sea glass is.
But there's a neat project about plastic pollution, which again, if we all use less plastic, that's less fossil fuels being used to make the plastic, less carbon and other heat trapping gases getting out there. But there's a woman, Angela Posey. She has a project called the Washed Ashore Project. She's out in Bend, Oregon. And she got picked up by the Smithsonian. She has traveling exhibits, but she got her community together to go pick up plastic off the beaches and clean it all up and then make these huge sculptures of like sea lions and sharks out of the beach plastic and the marine debris. And it's her whole organization is about bringing attention to marine debris, and her exhibits travel the country. And she's got a fabulous website, Washed Ashore Project. It's really neat, but there's an example. She's an artist and saw plastics on the beach and started her own community art center, and has really taken off from there. So there's a lot of opportunity for anybody who's creative to come and help. And in the last 2 minutes before we go, I just want to put a plug for another solution, is talking about climate change. Just talking about it, normalizing that it's okay to have concern and to care and to want to try to figure these things out really has a big impact. And if done in a reasonable tone of voice and hopeful, you can really inspire a lot of other people to join fabulous folks such as yourselves.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. And it's also important for just, expressing our concern and, fears and all of the emotions we have about these major changes that are happening. But I also think it's really important to help us work together, and we need other people. We, as humans, we naturally want to be with other people, and we won't turn the climate around overnight. So many of us are going to face major challenges, and so we need each other to get through that as well as we work on solutions. So, we just need each other, because it's not all hopeful and rosy, but we can hold both, the difficulty and the hope, but if we do it with each other.
Well said, Crystal. Thank you.
Well said.
Yeah, and I just, I guess, and my last thought would be to continue to incorporate, these conversations within the classroom. Whether it's science class, my kid, now he's in 11th grade, he's at McClure High School, Ferguson Florissant School District. And I think it's environmental science class. One of his homework assignments was to do like a survey of how many times we run the dishwasher, and do we recycle, do we compost, and all this kind of things. So, and then all of the kids were scored in some kind of a software. And then they were told if they keep doing the same things that they're doing as a family, they will need so many earths to keep the earth sustainable. And so, that's helping kids in North County begin to understand how their habits impact climate change. Now he's walking around the house looking at all the watts on everything, what's the watts on this lamp and on the microwave and the washing machine. So those are the things that are going to be really, really helpful. Make it practical, make it fun, make it so that they can relate to, and then they can talk to their parents.
Kids influence their parents. I yelled at my dad once when I was 8 for littering, and I don't think he did it since.
They do. They do that.
Jim, any last words before we get going?
Yeah, no, not really. But one thing when you're talking, it just occurred to me talking about water use, the huge issue that is going to come up is we're going to have more water than we need in the Midwest, where the West is just dying for water. And that's going to be difficult because there's already there's already plans to be shipping water out of the Missouri River Basin over into the Colorado River Basin. So the new water wars, and hopefully we can share and figure out ways to do this that are equitable, but that's going to be a real issue in the future when we have too much water and they don't have enough. And I think that's coming.
Yeah, sooner than later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you all enough. I think it's a variety of perspectives that we've got, and including Rajiv Ravulapati from the St. Louis Building Division, and talking about the BEPS program. You're all inspiring, and I can't thank you enough, Jim, Crystal, Erica, and Rajiv. Sorry that he couldn't be here tonight. You've all given wonderful presentations, and sorry we didn't have more questions.
It was a great discussion.
Yep. And I enjoyed meeting all you guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you all. And this is recorded and will be posted on St. Louis Zoo or stlzoo.org/climate change. All the presentations from this week, presentation I gave for our monthly ones from the previous week, and all future ones will also be on stlzoo.org/climate change. So feel free to drop in there and rewatch some stuff or watch some things that you missed, or pass them on to your networks and friends. So thank you all. It was really great having you. Thanks for taking the time.
All right.
Thank you.
For all the viewers, we encourage you to go to the zoo's website for more information on how to get involved in your community and find your best climate solutions. Thank you all again.
Bye.
Have a great evening.